One thing that we do got to start to pay attention to, though, is holdouts, Tyler. And these affect our fantasy teams more than we realize sometimes. Obviously, even if they start week one, sometimes missing training camp, missing preseason, it leads to injuries, it leads to decreased performance. Guys are upset over money, they don't get contracts, and then they don't play well. And we got three guys that are pretty notable that are holding out, or as they do now, so they get paid, they're holding in. They're going to practice, but not taking part in many reps. The first player I want to talk about is CeeDee Lamb, who's considerably, for a lot of people, the number one player off the board in PPR leagues. Some people have him there as at least the first receiver off the board. He was the number one wide receiver in fantasy last season. CeeDee Lamb is holding out. He wants a new bag. How are you feeling about CeeDee Lamb heading into the season, man, with just a couple weeks here to go?
So he's not there, right?
No, he's not. He's not there at
holding
all.
out, right? Yeah, that's what I thought. So for me, it's just I don't know. I don't know. There's no historical data to support this. It's just I kind of don't like that a little bit more than the hold-ins, just because he's not there at all. But like they've posted videos where he is practicing and doing all this kind of stuff. But yeah, for me, like how I approach my fantasy team is just I don't like these certain situations because I've just seen a few players, so I kind of associate it with all players just don't do well when they hold out. Like, I mean, Jonathan Taylor, like obviously JT had kind of an ankle injury as well, had surgery and then got placed on that. But it's just I don't like it, the uncertainty with these players. Now, I assume that they're going to be there and start practicing at some point. I know the other two are hold-ins. At some point, they'll be there, just when. And I don't like it as we progress a little. Like right now, I'm not as concerned, but next week, yeah, it's going to start to crank up a little bit. The week after that, definitely cranking up because we're getting really close to the start of the season at that point, and a lot of drafts are going to be happening. So right now, I don't want to say I'm nervous, but it's uneasy, especially for where they're going. Like the biggest problem is for where they're going is not only is it a player that you're taking in the 8th round. This is a player that you're using your first pick with that you need to hit really, or your chances of fantasy success goes down drastically, and you just got to manage your team incredibly well. So it's getting a little warm. I don't want to say I'm panicking. It's just getting a little warm.
Well, see, you know me, I'm cool as the other side of the pillow, man. I don't panic a lot. And even with CeeDee Lamb holding out, I think we got to wait until like 2-3 weeks because a lot happens in that time. He shows up to camp next week. We're going to be like, oh, fine. He's the number one receiver off the board. Things are fine and peachy. But if week 3 of the preseason comes around and we're still talking about a CeeDee Lamb holdout, to me, that screams, man, there's negative energy around this pick. So when it comes to CeeDee Lamb, and the fact that he's holding out actually doesn't concern me because it feels like he's like, I just want to get paid. We've seen this before, but the biggest thing is, like you mentioned, this isn't Josh Jacobs. You're taking him in the 3rd round, 4th round type thing. This is I'm holding out, and I have to use a top 5 pick on you in order to get you. Top 3 pick in most drafts, right? So I think I'm paying attention to when does he come back to the team? If he comes back and he doesn't get paid, or if he comes back and gets paid, when is he coming back to the team? Number 2 is, did he get paid? If he gets paid, I think we get a happy CeeDee Lamb. We get good production on the field. It's good to go. If he comes back and he doesn't get paid, now I'm starting to think, man, maybe we might get a diva season out of CeeDee Lamb. So it does affect things, but I think, it's something to note, and it's kind of going to be the same theory here with these other two we're going to talk about as well. The next player, your favorite player of all time ever in history, Jamar Chase, is doing somewhat of a holdout, but it's a hold in, right? Attending practice, not taking part of any of the reps. Obviously, T. Higgins, a guy that everybody thought would hold out or want to trade, is participating in camp, actually doing really well in camp. But how concerned are you for a guy that is a Jamar Chase advocate? How concerned are you right now?
I mean, kind of the same with CeeDee. Like, I do like that he's at least there. I don't know why. It just, for me, gives me a little bit more comfort that these, like him and Brandon Aiyuk are kind of there. Yeah, like they want to be there. And who wouldn't, right? Like, with the Cowboys situation, it's weird because they kind of have to pay Dak too, and like Micah Parsons, and like there's just some there's a little bit more going on there than Jamar Chase. But for me, I don't want to say, once again, I'm not worrying yet, but we get into next week. Yeah, I mean, going to be a little, I don't want to say concerned, but it's starting to go up. And then like we're in week 3 of August, and yeah, like I'm not once again, the biggest problem is just where you're taking these guys.
Yeah.
It's not like Josh Jacobs. Like you're taking Jamar Chase a lot of time as a top 6 pick in fantasy football. And it was kind of like the situation last year with Cooper Kupp, where he had an injury, but he just wasn't practicing. And I don't like that when players aren't doing this. So I'm not concerned yet. It's just something that I wish he was there so I can be all in on, because at the same time, it's like, you don't want to say, yeah, wide receiver one. And then all of a sudden he's holding out and people are going back to your videos and saying, bro, you're saying and it's like, bro,
Yeah. Yeah.
I wouldn't have said that if he was holding out still. So it kind of messes things a little bit, but I'm not panicking on him yet. It's just something that obviously want to keep a close eye on.
Yeah, people are going to cry no matter what you do, bro. So I mean, at the end of the day, people are going, they're going to ride with our takes or fade them. But, when I think of Jamar Chase, man, I'm like, obviously this is a player you want to see. The chemistry with him and Burrow is obviously there, but both of those guys have been injury prone in the past. So you want to see them on the field getting reps, knowing that they're healthy going into the season. To me, I'm not overly worried about Jamar Chase. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the CeeDee Lamb thing, but I'd also be curious if he doesn't get a contract and then he goes to the season, how does he manage those injuries? Does he try to keep himself healthy? Does he stay away? So the one question I have with Jamar Chase before we get into Brandon Aiyuk is, when would you start adjusting your rankings? Like, is that now you're like, let me backpedal off of like wide receiver one era? I know some of that sensationalized a little bit, but like, are you starting to backpedal a little bit off of like your Jamar Chase love? Or are you going to be like, I'm not adjusting anything until like later in the year? Because typically what I do is, unless it's just something that I think is going to affect him in the season, I'm not really adjusting anything until like last week of preseason, 2 weeks before the season starts.
Yeah, I mean, probably about 3 weeks. Like once we hit like middle of August, like August 15th kind of range, because the thing too is like during those times you start to have people do their fantasy drafts, right? Like people are kind of starting to draft a little bit. So and for me, I believe, because the thing with Jamar Chase too, I don't even think he has another year and then he has his 5th-year option. So like
Yeah.
he has multiple. It's not like CeeDee where I think next year he's just due. I could be wrong about that. I don't
No,
remember.
you're right. You're right. So he
Yeah,
has CD will be 5th-year option next year. Jamar Chase
next
still has
year.
another year. Yeah.
Yeah, so he has a little bit here. But it's like middle of the year, just because once again, like I don't want to. There's other guys that I think that can challenge to be the number one player at their respective positions. And when you have to take these guys in the top 5, it's not that I don't love these guys. I mean, I love him and I love CD. Like these are studs, absolute alpha wide receivers. But it's just, why would I take them in my fantasy draft if I have a draft and they're not actually signed and participating, when I could just take, Tyreek Hill. And I think
Yeah.
that he can be, the wide receiver one in fantasy football. So really, it's once we hit the middle of August is kind of where I might start moving them down just a tad over these other guys that I think can challenge to be the number one player at their position.
Well, guy on my side, Brandon Aiyuk, man, for the Niners. You see the Niner hat in the back. Obviously, that's my squad. It sucks that he has not got the bag. I think he deserves it because I think he's a top 10 guy in the league when it's all said and done. But he's going to camp too, and obviously making a lot of noise. Asked for the trade. He's going to camp, but then not participating. But he's different, right? Because like CD and Chase, they're like the clear dogs. Whereas Aiyuk has already kind of been like, is he the 1A, the 1B? And right now, you got to take Brandon Aiyuk in like the top 15 receivers. I mean, he's been that the last 3 years. So respectably, you got to take him that high. But when it comes to Aiyuk, it's like that could be a really big difference. This team could decide, like, look, we just drafted Ricky Pearsall. We want him to be more involved. We just re-signed Juwan Jennings to a 2-year deal. We want him to be more involved. Debo, we've already paid him. Let's get him more involved. So it's not like the offense is as reliant on Brandon Aiyuk. So I do have some concern with him the longer he holds out. And if there's any one of these 3 that I'm going to like significantly move earlier, it's probably Brandon Aiyuk because, to be honest, it doesn't seem like the Niners want to pay him the money that he's asking for. And to be honest, it seems like he's the one that has the biggest risk to our fantasy lineups.
Yeah. And this feels more like Jonathan Taylor-esque of last year, where it's like, it's a weird situation where the front office I don't, like you said, I don't really know what's going on here, like why they haven't paid him as well. Like he's definitely worth the money, but they do have to consider paying Brock Purdy, I guess, coming up soon, and you already paid Debo, so it's tough. And it's also out of like the other 2 guys is I don't think that Brandon Aiyuk can be the wide receiver one overall in fantasy football, right? There's players that are currently going around him that I really like as well that I think can finish just as high as Brandon Aiyuk. So I agree with you in the sense where I would definitely move him down the board quite a bit. I mean, I'd rather take Debo over him. I think Debo can be fantastic in fantasy football, has an
Yeah,
elite
starting to
ceiling.
get
So it's just for me personally, once again, it's more towards like the middle half of August. But I don't have a problem with just completely avoiding him at current costs and going other range just because the guys that are going around him I think can be just as good as well.
Yeah, I
So
have him right next to Debo right now, and it's like I'm having trouble keeping him up there. Just with the longer this holdout goes, the more I'm like, you know what? This kind of seems like the player that I love Ayuk as the player. That's one of my guys, but I'm starting to come down a little bit on Ayuk, and I'm like, you know what? Maybe I'll have to adjust these rankings sooner than later, as opposed to some of the other guys that are out there.
yeah, I already have Debo over him. I'd rather take Debo right now.
Yeah, I ain't
Just
mad at that. He's got the upside. Debo has the upside.
Debo has been a top 3 wide receiver in fantasy before. Dude's a stud.
Yeah, on a
They're
points per
both
game
studs.
basis, yes.
They're both studs.
Post stats, bro.